Udaipur Architecture Festival, and hopefully you are having a lot of fun and a lot of learning and knowledge sharing with our most of the speakers. And it's so I won't take much time in introducing a very special speaker today evening, since you have already heard me a lot during Heritage Walk. And so yeah, I'm gonna say a small thing that during our college days, while we we had visited Goa. So every student visits Goa in first or second year, and then while reaching fourth or fifth year, it's dream of every architectural student in India, at least, to work with this architect. Yes, I'm talking about architect Dean De Cruz. Hello, sir. Welcome to the Udaipur Architecture Festival. So I will pass on to you now. So I would request you to introduce your amazing journey by yourself, since we are in festive mode. Over to you, sir.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. So I've been working in the field of architecture for the last over 35 years, and and when we started off and we talk about these issues of sustainability was hardly a word, at that time, green building, things like that. But we realized that we exercised a lot of those principles when we started off, because we worked in a very Laurie Baker-like style. And it's only recently we're trying to do it consciously, but it's quite an uphill task. So I'll share with you my little journey over these years, and our successes and failures, and then we'll have a little question session after that, I guess. Yeah. So can you see the screen?
Yes, sir, we can.
Okay, great. Okay, so I've been educated as an architect. I'm not really a trained planner, but I realize that as architects we work in a very small domain. We work with buildings. We work within the confined plot. But about 12 years ago, I was, along with Charles Correa and Edgar Ribeiro, actually invited to prepare the regional plan for Goa. And that was a tremendous experience there, because you're suddenly moving up scales in architecture. You're moving from just designing buildings to working on a whole state, not just a city, but a whole state as well. And it was a great learning, because it's a scale at first I couldn't grasp, but there was a great amount of excitement and actually understanding, and in a way playing God. The fact that you're actually working at a scale where you're going to influence the ecology or protect the ecology of the area, you're going to influence the economics of an area, and basically the lives of all the people that you're designing for. So I think as architects, it's important that we really understand the impact of what we do, whether it's small scale moving up to large. And I would really think as architects, we need to look beyond the confines of our building, look at how our buildings, influence the areas around us, because collectively all what we design actually has a big impact on society. So the first experience was actually working with sustainability, came with designing for the Pune municipality. We were shortlisted to do their Sustainable Building Center for Pune municipality. And this was about almost 12, 15 years ago. And it was this experience where we actually had to research, because consciously we never really looked at sustainability, and the principles of green building design were just coming out, of getting off the electrical grid, of recycling water in big ways, how we can actually minimize things, and new materials coming into the market. So it was a great exercise in responding to these new materials and technologies, and putting them in a building where the general public could come and visit the building. So we had these buildings which had natural light and ventilation systems. They had skylighting systems and underground cooling systems, of course off the grid as much as possible. And it was a tremendous learning for us of getting into it and understanding what these basic principles. And that time all the green building laws and everything were coming into place, and responding to them in some way. And all over the world we see that green building has been going on for many years. This is the Eden project in Cornwall, which basically they recycled a mine and put it into a center where they've actually recalled different natural zones, environmental zones, of the world. and as well as showcased all the new technologies coming out in the area of green building and sustainability. And that's the central building that you see there, and of course the green biodomes, which encase um, the, all the various planting zones of the world. Uh, when we worked in planning in architecture, we were actually asked by the Maharashtra uh, Tourism Development Corporation to work on a 40-room hotel in a place called Hadi, which is just north of Goa. It was a coastal area, and unfortunately, the land they bought had come into CRZ recently, so they couldn't really build. They were searching for another piece of land. So at that time, there was a very innovative IAS officer in the place, and he said, let's think of something, out of the box. And we came up with this idea of actually, if you are to encourage tourism, let's not build a hotel. Let's give tourism to the people. So we actually measured all the houses in the village, and for the fisher folk, we said, let's create these floating platforms. So we actually designed, these like the Kerala houseboats. These little floating platforms act as little hotels, where rooms can come together in the evening and they can float out during the day and have their own sort of, private giant pool, as it was. And so this is the basic designs of the little flotel thing. And all the houses we measured, and we proposed how they can actually run into homestays and, adding a few rooms. So by basically creating collectives, the government got involved in actually supporting them through cooperatives, helping them do up their homes, and all the money that would have otherwise gone into a 40-room hotel was used to develop the village. So they improved their jetties, they improved their marketplaces, their places of worship. We put in facilities, beach facilities, for the tourists that would come in the area. So really, we benefited the local population. That's very important to understand, that as in any tourist destination, is how can you actually make sure that the host population actually gets a greater benefit of tourism, where they benefit first, and the tourists also benefit, and they respect the local culture. So rather than build these 3 to 5-star hotels, they actually stay with the people, so they get a far more genuine experience. And they also start respecting the people who are hosting them, and not just look down to them as waiters and room boys. In my design journey towards green, one of the heroes I had was a person called Christopher Day. And Christopher Day was one architect who did not build for a single client, in the sense that he would not take individual houses. He would build for communities. And that's what we need to look at as architects today. Can we, build communities rather than houses, individual houses? Because in that way, you're actually saving resources, because you're combining resources. You're actually reducing the footprint of building a lot of your, power, water, food, community services. So in places like this, people come together, so they create collective kitchens, and there's a great involvement and engagement of the people in actually designing it with the architect, where each house is still unique and different. It's not that it's a cookie cutter sort of house and all are identical. And they decide on collectives. They actually start making their houses smaller, and they have a common kitchen, a common dining space. So usually it ends up in homeschooling. It ends up in a lot of community cultural activities and people coming together. And that's what the old sort of way of living was. We look at the joint family system in India. If you look at the villages in India, where people actually engage with others. Now, in our house, we tend to lock ourselves up. We're very individual in the way we actually go through our lives. So this exact example of Christopher Day's. So I'll come back to, Goa and the regional plan and the influences had on the way we design. So Goa, as everyone knows, it's a green state. We have about a 40% protected forest cover. The rest of the lands are, orchard and water bodies and fields. And so in preparing the plan, we said that we have to protect these areas. So we've mapped all the eco-sensitive zones in Goa and ensure that these are protected. And we also mapped the settlement areas, where nature is present and where man is present. And these are the two maps of, the densities showing of the green areas and the densities of human population in the area, and the influence and the overlaps that they have in the development pattern. So that's the eco-sensitive zones area. And the various things we're trying to protect, the sea, the orchard areas, the fields, the forests. So when we started preparing the regional plan, we actually looked at the village maps, using Google. At that time, we didn't have GIS systems in place in Goa. So we used Google to really understand. And Google is accessible to everyone. So even the people of villages could understand, what was the nature of their land and how things laid out in terms of settlement area, fields, road networks. And this was one of the first participative plans in the country, where we took a base plan to the village and we said, you prepare the plan, you prepare what you would like in your village. We map what exists from our side. And so village by village, we went around, and our office really helped this process in helping individual villages to actually prepare their plan. But before they prepared the plan, we needed them to understand what development and infrastructure was all about. So we defined what infrastructure was. So and most people think of infrastructure as, roads and factories and power lines and things like that. But infrastructure is all about, it's not just about that. It's also about where we get our water from, where we get our food from, where our carbon is sequestered. And that's also infrastructure, but that's actually keeping us alive. And usually this green infrastructure, they call, which is nature's infrastructure, is at least 5 to 10 times bigger to support us than the hard gray infrastructure that we normally think of. So we have to ensure that we protect the green infrastructure, because that's essential for our lives. Yeah. So mapping villages, we ensure that, say the gray infrastructure is mapped where people stay, and the green infrastructure, which actually gives them all the daily necessities that they have. Yeah. We also recognize that in a state like Goa, it's an assemblage of about some 400 odd villages, and each village is actually independent. It's autonomous in a way. It has its settlement areas, and so that supporting that is actually the fields, water bodies, orchard areas, grazing lands, forests, and all these actually eventually support the people of the area. And most people actually get all their daily requirements from the village itself. It's produced in the village, consumed in the village. And so we said that's the cell of development. And so the state is like a giant organism which actually lives off the land in some way. So that's the final map that each village, this is one of the typical villages that we had, Para, which we helped, which is close to my own village. And the people actually started mapping, animal trails, bird nesting sites, all the little water bodies that run through the place, and all the aspirations that we wanted the village to have. So can we have a double water harvesting system? Can we afforest a particular area? Can we preserve these fields and use for something else? So these are aspirations that actually came on board by the people, and which is impossible to do through a town planning department, because you will never get that ground reality that all the really clear aspiration that people wanted. So it was a tremendous learning for us and for the people, and a great rewarding experience for people, because they know that all that they want is now coming. They don't have to go through political systems and local dadas, whatever, to actually get their way to do things. Here's the government is reaching out to them and actually acknowledging what they wanted. So when we actually worked on the development issues, we wanted to define what defines a village or defines a unit of development. And we recognize this, the geological structure of what they call a watershed, basically where water collects off the hill, moves down and moves eventually into the sea, was actually a unit of development. And a watershed is something which is it's giant. In fact, India is one giant watershed. It can be divided into various zones of rivers moving down to the sea. So in Goa, we have the mountains and the plateaus and the plains, and eventually the coastal area. So all the water slowly collects from all these bigger zones and eventually trickles down into bigger rivers into the sea. And that's like a giant watershed. And all these little rivulets are smaller watersheds. And we've found that a lot of these water systems actually fed life into the thing, because water is life. So water mixed with soil gives you all that you need in terms of agriculture, in terms of producing oxygen for us, in terms of producing food. So it's extremely essential for development, and it is your backbone. Like agriculture is the backbone of India, and water is that sub backbone which actually provides for all that. So we looked at how communities actually are defined by watersheds and how they can you know create these and support these units of development, and how they can independent. So that doesn't mean that a unit of a village is completely isolated and disconnected. So we looked at how can network villages actually come to form these larger ecological and economic systems. So this is a study done along with um, uh, the Royal Institute of Arts in Stockholm. So students came down there, they tried to understand what goes, and they did these sort of very appealing sort of imagery as to how can we address these various zones of Goa, like the coastal areas, and what are the issues in terms of erosion or collection of water, or garbage and recycling of stuff. And so what we needed is something that would address the issues. So something that provides, say, shade on the beach, that takes up the waste of the area, that provides some sort of greenery in the space. And so each zone was actually connected. So where the agricultural areas, how you'd connect the biodiversity of the area, or how do we look at tourism and drawing from, say, the Southeast Asia experience of people living in field areas, and the concept called agro-tripping, where basically they actually live in areas where people grow food. So they experience not only the growing of food while they're there, the partaking of meals along with it, and also imbibing the local culture. And a lot of the local culture, we look at our feasts and festivals, have come from an agricultural cycle, the time of sowing and harvesting. And all that is linked to rituals and religious systems in the place. And so we can actually connect all these together and share that rich experience of culture through agriculture, with the tourist population. And of course, recognizing the forest areas and experience. We design a lot of jungle lodges across the country, and one of the great benefits of actually designing jungle lodges is not just the tourism of experiencing nature, but it's education. It's educating people into understanding the great need to protect nature, because a lot of times we actually, and now we find that there's a great man-nature conflict, a man-animal conflict that's taking place. We are going more and more into these things. Wild animals are coming out of these areas because they're being displaced. Zoonotic diseases like COVID have actually come out from these, where we're actually interfering with nature systems. So we need to preserve that, respect it, and let people experience how special these areas are, and the need to actually expand these areas rather than encroach upon them. So when looking at the watersheds, this is a more recent study that we've done for a village close by, is understanding this village is a perfect watershed, where it's got hills on two sides, and it had 7 springs there, and only 3 were working. So in redeveloping the village, we realized that we first have to ensure that the water systems work. So revive the springs, and in the central area was the land that steps down, where you see those little blue patches. So we created these check dams along the way and harvest water. So some water is used for agriculture, some water can be used for recreation, some could be used for local industries. So you harvest the water. So as it moves down over there, you can collect water for different purposes. And so you don't need to pump water from some faraway dam or lake or something. With Goa's high rainfall, we can actually harvest this water, and it's a tremendous economic driver for the state as well, if used correctly, which is hardly used at the moment. And the various ways of using water. I mean, there are new concepts of aquaponics, which is basically aquaculture and hydroponics. So using land-based agricultural system and water-based agricultural systems, and combining. And this is a very low footprint sort of concept of using land and water to create productive landscape. So this is an interesting project when you're looking at how do we look at the landscape in the area and centralize it around water. This is Hammarby, which is on the outskirts of Stockholm. I visited the place some years ago, and it's what you call a brownfield project. So a brownfield project is basically, it's an old industrial area which is around a rivulet, and a small river that passed through. Uh, and it was recycled into a mini city, actually a satellite city of Stockholm. And they decided that in this city, they're actually going to push this whole sustainable agenda. So Hammarby decided that they must actually define what sustainability is about. And of course, sustainability, when you look at density of buildings, and you normally think that high-rise buildings are the most efficient, but they're not actually. So they realized that the most efficient density is actually up to about 5 floors, where everything is walk-up, low-rise buildings, high density, and then you put in all the systems around it. So whether you're looking at how you recycle your water systems, can you produce food within the area, and how do you work out the economic systems within. So it's what they call a sort of closed loop system. So even food, you have patches, like community patches, where individual families can have their own little patch of land where they can grow whatever type of food they want to, and in close proximity to where they live. And you have just spells out the various things that you can do in terms of organic food, ecological fashion, and carpooling, and all sorts of pedestrianization, cycling in the city. So there's a great experiment, and a very successful experiment, and a lot of cities in Europe are actually now going that way, trying to push these agendas, using materials in construction, prefabbing things so that you can recycle, change, and modify things as you go along easily. So essentially a closed loop system where energy, water, and waste actually are linked together. In fact, Stockholm, the whole city is heated on waste. All their garbage is burned, and the whole city it's because it's mainly cold in that area, and it's heated on garbage. So they don't use coal or any other, even renewable energy. It's just the waste that is gone. It goes back into providing heat energy, at least for the city. Another interesting concept is the city. It's a utopian concept proposed by this architect Soon, where you look at the city, but the way city is developed today is quite frightening, because they just keep on expanding, and it's driven by developers most often, especially in third world countries. Singapore, of course, has this a very progressive system, but it's already developed a fair amount. But Soon imagines a new Singapore, and we try to define maybe what they couldn't do in Singapore. So he said, if you want to make a city which is walking, which is the net goal of most cities, if you really want to make it good ecologically, is to take the car away from the city, because the car is the biggest destroyer of cities. And he said, in the center of the city, you have what he called the mechanized economy, and the mechanized economy is where you actually put industry and manufacturing and everything. And you think that's a disaster. If you put the mechanized economy within the center of a city, you're going to have a great amount of pollution, and there's going to be problems. But actually, it's the other way around, because the moment you put the mechanized economy in the center, which normally is this giant sprawl outside cities and very polluting, they're far away from any problem, you actually become far more responsible. And that mechanized economy also uses the greatest amount of energy. Therefore, you can pump in energy into this heart of the city. You can create recycling systems. So a lot of the things, especially heat energy and other waste that comes out of it, can be actually recycled by the rest of the city. So you have this very low footprint mechanized but highly efficient mechanized economy. And peripheral to that, you can create retail, you can create offices, you can create education, healthcare systems. And then further on, you're creating residences, low and high-rise residences. And then further on, you move into the agricultural land. So he estimated that you need about 16 of these 1 square kilometer cities in Singapore. And the rest of the land can actually be green space. And all these 16 sort of mini micro cities are connected by rapid transport systems, which just come up to the center of the city. So basically the mechanized economy. So it's used both by people and by goods and connected together. And I know it's fairly utopian, but it's really interesting thinking to see that there are people and organizations willing to reinvent the city and try and address these problems. We have the city of Mazda in the Middle East also, which is attempting that, which is again highly pedestrianized system. Unfortunately, it hasn't succeeded very much because some of the concepts that are applied over there are not really suitable to the sort of cultural background that Mazda has. So it's very important that we understand what the cultural background of a place is and how we can respond to that in some way. So halfway across the world in Brazil, I don't know if you've heard of this place called Curitiba. So Curitiba is a city in Brazil which wasn't very well off until this mayor came along, as Jaime Lerner. And Jaime Lerner is actually an architect, and he got very concerned with the way the city was poorly developing, and Jaime actually decided that he's going to be involved in actually planning the city and bring about change in the city. So he got down, he motivated people when he became mayor, and he started putting systems that made a big difference to the city. So, of course, looked at the typical thing of pedestrianization. How can he pedestrianize, reduce the traffic in cities? Introduced rapid transit systems using bus systems, which just run two ways. So you just have one interchange in the thing, and with one ticket you can travel anywhere, even though you're changing buses from any point of the city and any other point. And because it's so efficient, you could keep the prices down. Curitiba had this problem of favelas, which are basically slums, and slums are so dense that you couldn't even get a small vehicle inside, so they couldn't take the garbage out. So he came up with the idea of 1 kilo of vegetables and fruit for 3 kilos of garbage. So people started clearing out the garbage from the area because they get fresh food from the city. And in that way, he put in all these incentivizations to actually start cleaning up the city and get people to participate in that process rather than the government sort of does everything. So even the river that actually passed through it, he made sure that buffer zones are in it. So it created productive landscape on either side of the thing. And it also prevented flooding. In case flooding happened, it would not destroy any infrastructure of the area. So all these were really innovative sort of things that he did for the city. So when we look at cities and the way they develop, this is one image that strikes us. This is done, almost 70 years ago by Corbusier of what the future city is going to be like. And that we thought, oh gosh, it's way too utopian to see something like this with these roads in between and these giant buildings all around. But the fact is, we have gone that way, and this is Dubai today. And so all we see is cars, and we can hardly see any people on the street there. So our cities are being taken over by vehicles tremendously, and we can see that there's a great amount of chaos that they cause, and there's pollution. If you look at Delhi, for example, the amount of pollution that is caused, and especially today in a pandemic time where lung diseases are a big problem and you have to have them. So we need to address what the problems that cities create. And so various architects have been trying to do this. So to reduce the footprint of cars in the city, this is one scheme that came up, which is basically, can we put everybody into a giant building? So it's a city as a building. So it's supposed to be a 20-story building, giant. It must be about a couple of kilometers long in a way. And so you have the city, which all you have is elevators and moving walkways in between. So there's no need for cars. And of course, you've got industry and agriculture, all mechanized and processing. Around it. So you save the farmland, but you've made a very inhumane condition for people to live in. But the interesting solutions all over, and this is in our very own country, which is Auroville, which is the galaxy as they call it, which here of course Auroville is centered around the Mata Mandir, so it's got a spiritual core, but it also tries to imbibe the same concept of creating a core where the more efficient or the more sort of the factors that hold the city together are on the core, and it slowly moves out into agricultural land at the periphery. So this galaxy, of course, spins out in a very interesting fashion. Unfortunately, or fortunately, Auroville hasn't moved that way. And Auroville, as you see today, is actually a series of communities. And that's a problem with when just when you just have one architect or planner working on a city scheme, where it tends to be very limited in its thought and very. So even though it was an interesting plan, it it's fairly utopian and fairly rigid. If you look at even Chandigarh, for example, it's interesting, but it gets very, very drab after some time. So the thing is to let there be a mix of both a very informal system which sits upon a formal sort of grid of things. So you set things out as a pattern or a way forward, and you allow people and time to actually modify that. So there are corrections that constantly take place here. And so these utopian ideas will just keep on flowing as we keep on addressing climate change. People say water is going to come, so let's have floating cities with the thing of bringing, the need for greenery in cities and to sort of absorb all the pollutants over there and cool the city down. There are these green building concepts are coming up. So there are attempts all over. But we need to start small. So there are various movements coming in, especially centering around food, because we realize that food actually has a great footprint in terms of energy and water. And cities produce, they have rainfall which goes into gutters, and they have waste which also goes into gutters. And what if you combine both and you can actually grow your food within your city itself? So the concept of edible cities, the concept that everything can be grown within walking distance at least, or just in your backyard as well. And the concept of slow cities basically where came from the slow food movement, which is where rather than have fast food, you sit down and enjoy a meal, you digest it, you interact with community, and the concept of slow cities is something which has really grown. In fact, Europe now has about 2,000 slow cities, and the slow city is, we normally think they're going to be disasters, economic disasters, because we need fast food systems, we need giant malls. So in a slow city, they don't have anything like that. They make sure that it's all centered around pedestrianization, it's all centered around small scale outlets, and where everybody is actually, the whole pace of life is slow. And now we realize in the pandemic, by slowing down, actually the quality of our life has actually increased, and we have better quality of life rather than running around because we have the ability to do that. And of course, the basic principles of sustainability of energy, water, all that integrated into slow city concepts. So there's one thing that's come out from looking at cities all over the world, and that is to create circular economies, to keep the money in close circulation, to ensure that, like nature, even your ecology, like trees grow, they die, and the dead trees again feed new plants in the area. Similarly with animals, and so while that is a sort of circular economy, it's been taken to another level and what they call a donut economy. So a donut economy doesn't just look at economics, it also looks at the ecology of a place. So how does it benefit the people? How does it benefit society? And looking at all the different parameters of healthcare, education, and what way does it benefit in all sections of society, in the ecological side and the social side of things. And these are just two diagrams to talk about the donut economy. So you can check it on the net and see, research the donut economy, and it's a great template to use for any city, because of course cities vary from place to place, but this template can be applied to virtually any city, because the issues of the ecology and the social needs of people need to be addressed there. So in the donut economy, you have a typical thing is to look at the closed loop system in terms of regeneration and restoring, and create systems which actually connect, like I talked to you earlier about network villages. In a similar way, you can have a network city. So within the city itself, you actually have, so certain parts of the city produce food, certain parts produce products, certain parts has skilled manpower. And how do you actually bring these things together to be far more effective? So when you look at the world and the way it's going today, and why we're talking about the issues of sustainability, we need to look at where we've gone wrong. And if we look at the Earth, it's divided into various sectors, and we know it as the Earth, the core of the Earth, which is what we call the lithosphere. And on the surface, which we hardly see, and on the surface is what we see mostly, which is really the biosphere, where all living things are, land is, and of course the hydrosphere, where water is. And beyond that, that actually protects us from cosmic rays and keeps us alive on this planet, is the atmosphere, which is this giant globe of air around us. And we need to respect that and understand, how is that kept going, and how is it made, and how do we ensure this maintains its protective layer. And for that, we need to look back a little, and we just look back 100 years, and how much of biosphere materials, materials that from the surface of the earth, so it could be rocks, it could be all trees, wood, whatever, which we use for construction, which we use for our tools 100 years ago, was a very high amount. And now, in the last 100 years or so, we've gone into the lithosphere, we've gone into the heart of the earth, and we've pulled out all these materials. We've pulled out metals, we've pulled out coal, we've pulled out oil, we've pulled out natural gases. And all these are actually polluting the biosphere and challenging nature in a way. And because nature's, is responding and trying to sort of deal with it, but it takes a long, long time for nature to deal with all these pollutants. So we need to recognize that if we are to do something from the earth, we need to reduce our reliance on lithosphere materials. Whatever's taken out, can we recycle it as fast as possible? And can we actually look at more at biosphere materials, and materials which are virtually recycled by nature? We look at, if we're using wood or mud in our constructions, we see that these materials, the moment we dismantle them, go back into the earth, and we can access them very easily again. And look at mud, for example. Look at the traditional buildings that we've seen in places like Morocco, built out of pure mud, which lasts hundreds of years as well. And it's also allowed for building crafts to flourish. And it's not that the small buildings, they're tall, 8-10-story buildings built in mud. So we have this great tradition, and it's material of great strength, but we've lost the ability to actually understand these materials and continue the use of them. And in every climatic region, they've responded in their use of materials, in the innovation of spaces around it. And I think as architects, we need to really look at how can we respond in some way to this. And it doesn't have to be these drab little structures, whatever. It can be giant things. And look at these buildings from Mongolian areas. And it's, there's such powerful, buildings, even architecturally, which respond to the climate in a very positive way. Even the work of, say, Hassan Fatih, which draws, from a traditional architecture, puts it into a contemporary context, and is so valid today as well. And even the work of Sonam Wangchuk in Ladakh, again responding, reinventing the local architecture and responding to the climate needs, trapping the sunlight and heating these buildings, especially in cold climates. And if you just look at projects, say, from the Aga Khan Awards or from the Curry Stone Awards, all these are buildings which are very simple buildings, but they're responding to local climate conditions, they're responding to local methods of construction, where they're recalling the traditional crafts of the area. So it's great hope for us. And we as architects, especially young architects, tend to get influenced by a lot of flashy buildings. But there's a tremendous opportunity we have to address the problems of the nation, is really looking back at our roots and how can we actually use these materials in an effective way. And how do we actually bring community together? Because it's important that we look at how creating centers for community education, development, and knowledge. And we've seen people at this. If you look at, say, the work of Hunashala and the way they've done the restoration in various disaster areas and creating places for people to come together, training people in the building industry in some way. And even as individual architects, there are a lot of architects who've actually now pushed forward their own agenda of trying to do something about what's happening in the world today. And this is the work of Revati Kamath. Neelam Manjunath is another brilliant architect who's actually worked with these natural materials, especially in bamboo and other natural materials, in trying to show that we can build simply, we can build cheaply, and yet extremely effectively and creatively as well. And of course, Didi Contractor is not even an architect, and she's so sort of got her pulse on what is really needed for the place, and again, recalling traditional materials and crafts, the area. So we see great hope. I certainly hope that young architects can be inspired by people like that, and rather than the flashy architects that they are today, we see around in flashy magazines, by these people who actually work on the ground. And we need more of these people, because as architects, we tend to build for the rich only, and that's really 1% of the population. There's 99% of the population waiting for us to contribute outside. And the only way to do it is actually to start showcasing yourself. So we, as an architectural firm, decided we have to also walk the talk in a way. So we've set up what we call Design Valley, which is basically a collective, a community of designers and architects and planners that have come together. So there are a number of plots in this little valley that we have in Goa, and we've centered it around the 3 buildings that we have, which is basically the architecture building. On the left, in the middle is the design center, and on the right is the product design building. So in the design center is where we reach out to people. We reach out to community, we reach out in educational schemes, we reach out on mentoring programs, where we actually share our knowledge and help people in their own journey towards sustainability in the way. So we are off the grid. We run completely on solar energy. We produce our own food from a permaculture piece of land that we have at the side. So all the water is harvested, the waste is harvested. And though we are not fully self-sufficient in food, we try to, as much as possible, produce whatever we can in the area. So those are 2 of the buildings in the area that we have, and some interior shots of the offices that we have, and the co-working space and the mentorship spaces that we have. And there are constant programs running over here. So we have workshops and seminars and talks and discussions, so that people can actually share their knowledge with other people. So it's important that we as architects not just work in our little cocoon and keep it to ourselves, but we share, we're open to discussion on things, and we reach out to the community to make a difference. Yeah. Thank you very much. I can't hear you. Okay.
Sorry. Hello. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much for this wonderful session. And everybody talks about sustainability, and but sustainability at this scale, like this was a very, very huge scale to understand sustainability. Talking about sustainability at this scale seems like never thought about it. Most of us, I think, never thought about it getting implemented at this level. So, sir, I have a small question for you. Is it possible?
Yeah.
Am I audible?
Yeah, now, yeah. Tell me.
Yeah. So, sir, I have a question. Is it possible for us to bring forest to cities? Is it possible?
You can. There are movements which are basically. If there's a place called, I wouldn't say forest, but New York City, there's a place called. There's a movement called Gotham Greens. So Gotham Greens, of course, Gotham is taken from the Batman movie, because Gotham is like the parallel New York City in a way,
right.
The dark side of New York City, and they've actually taken all the terraces of the tall buildings and started greening them up. Of course, they're growing mainly food on the thing, and they're supporting local restaurants, so high value food, in fact. Here, there's also the concept of actually having urban forests here, because trees are a great way to actually sequester carbon dioxide, take out the pollutants from the area. And so there are movements actually to green up the cities, plant more trees in cities, and ensure that that provides far more breathing space. And our cities are really suffering a lot, and we can see a great amount of people are now suffering from lung diseases like asthma and various pneumonias that are coming out. And so I think trees are one way of definitely solving that, and bringing trees into cities up to a level of forests is important. And whenever you design a building, I think it's important to look at the footprint of a building. So, before one starts to design, you actually see what are you displacing, and taking away from the land. So whether it's the trees in the area, the small bushes, the small animal, the insects, and that's why the Bhumi Puja of a building is so, responsive to nature, and the fact that you're basically asking permission from nature and you're apologizing, to nature for actually displacing it in a way. So it's an extremely sensitive area beyond the ritual that architects need to imbibe, that we as architects actually destroying the environment in a way. So how do we minimize that destruction? That's extremely important.
Right, perfect, wonderful, sir. So basically, sir, in Udaipur, we have, especially in the old city, where we have houses, individual houses, and then we have commercial space just below the house. So what are your views on this kind of mixed use planning?
So it's interesting. I think it's also following the European way. A lot of Europeans have this concept where their food courts and their shopping below that, and above that are smaller apartments. So since you have food and shopping close by, the need to actually entertain at home goes. You can somebody comes over, you go down to a small restaurant downstairs. Whatever you need for your daily needs is just a few floors away, and so it's a very efficient system, but it needs to be planned well. And I think a mixed-use system is very important, because in a mixed-use system where basically you're mixing various classes of society, in India, of course, it could be even various religious groups and things, it's important to introduce that, because that creates a healthy cosmopolitan environment. A lot of the problems that we see today of conflict between castes, between religions, between economic stratas, are because we tend to segregate them to various zones. So mixed-use development is also a Robin Hood model of developing. So basically, you take from the rich and you give to the poor. So you subsidize the development of housing, say, for the poor, by charging the rich a little extra. So that's one way you can actually do it and actually support housing for the poor by creating mixed-use development. We've tried this out in New York City extremely successfully, and it can be replicated in any part of the world.
And there's this sense of security also, I think, attached to it, maybe.
There's a sense of security, there's a sense of interest. I mean, so people of different sort of economic strata. So people understand the moment you live, if you're rich, from a rich family, you live in a rich thing, your worldview is very limited. If you're from a poor family, your exposure to the rest of the world is also very limited. So the moment we mix it creates a much richer society.
Perfect. Thank you so much, sir. Okay, there's this one question that has come up by a participant asking, how have you been able to convince authorities with such planning, with such huge plannings? How do you convince authorities?
So actually, before being asked to come on the regional plan as a task force member, I was actually part of a group of activists throughout the previous regional plan. We found a whole lot of defects and a whole lot of corruption issues with the previous regional plan. And so we were able to pinpoint them and embarrass the government. And for the first time in the history of preparing regional plans in Goa, they actually scrapped a regional plan. And as punishment, they put me on to prepare the new regional plan, basically to keep me quiet. So they said, okay, fine, we must get this guy to actually work on the new regional plan. So then I had to, I realized that to prepare a new plan is far more difficult than to throw out an old one. And so, but it came with a lot of trepidation in terms of how and carefulness in how do you go about a plan. And therefore, we left a lot to the people. We couldn't decide for the people itself. We left it open-ended, and we left it in a way which people have choices and able to actually make those choices. So we cannot make choices for people. We do not have, as planners or architects or even as government officials, we do not have a complete pulse on what the people are. So it's important that feedback is given, but with guidance.
Right. Perfect, sir. And one last question, sir. Somebody has asked, is green technology really green? Can you guide us on that?
So unfortunately, what you see in terms of the green building things that's happening across, it's like, learning a new language. So it has these guidelines, and it doesn't mean that, they're all perfect, because they need to change with time. So Terry's been trying to update its thing in the Terry Griha thing, taking it beyond the lead system, which is more universal, and making Terry Griha more local in a way. But you need to use common sense. So we were doing a building in Noida, and we were thinking of a thin walling external system, and we thought, okay, fine. We have two choices. We have a natural stone, and we've got a ceramic or vitrified tile that we can use, because we wanted a very thin system which we're going to run water down. And of course, the most obvious choice would be natural stones. We thought, okay, fine, let's choose. And being in Noida, we said, okay, Rajasthan is close by. We can get really lovely natural stones in the area. And it seemed a choice. And then we did an analysis which went beyond just, the thing of something looking pretty. So we looked at the Rajasthan stone. We looked at the issues that come with Rajasthan stone. The fact that a lot of the quarries are very polluting. A lot of the labor that actually work in these quarries are bonded labor. They're taken advantage of. They're paid a pittance. And there's pollution in the area as well. Whereas looking at a vitrified tile which is produced in a factory, the actual tile is far more efficient. Its pollution is taken care of. The laborers are well paid over there. The energy is tried to make as efficiently as possible. And therefore, actually, after the whole analysis, we found that actually this industrially produced material was possibly better to use than a natural stone, which initially we were thought obvious. So we need to look at all these other social factors, environmental factors, human factors, human rights factors, before we actually make decisions. And a lot of green building systems do not take those points onto account. So it's important that we crunch our own numbers and make these decisions ourselves.
Thank you so much, sir. Okay, there's one more question has popped up. One last question, sir. How practice has molded your life?
Practice has molded life. I think it molds everybody's lives. But I think it's over the years, there are great learnings, and it's important that we keep agile, that we keep on being willing to change. So every 7 years or so, we say, okay, let's have a new approach, a new style of approach. Working on projects, and we use new materials, new technologies, new approach to the architecture. If the architecture can be made as temporary as possible, can we renew the architecture? So all these are slow experiments we try over the years. So I think one thread that runs through them is the fact that to be honest with whatever you're doing. So take honest feedback from other people, your contemporaries in the field. Take honest feedback from clients of how they like them. A lot of magazines don't give that honest feedback. I mean, they always praise, oh, great building. And in truth, the buildings do not perform well. They cost too much. They have major problems with them. The people who use them actually are not very happy with it. So it's important that, yes, we do make mistakes, but it's important to learn from them and apply them, and not be arrogant and say that, okay, fine, this is my architecture, it's my sort of project, and I don't care what the others think about. This is the way I want to do it. So as architects, we need to really, subdue our egos and ensure that the eco aspects are taken care of. We look at the ecological things far more than our own personal sort of agendas.
Perfect. Thank you so much, sir, and thank you so much for being part of Udaipur Architecture Festival. And we would like to invite you to Udaipur and give us a chance to play host to you whenever you feel like. And thank you, Sukhmani Plailam, for partnering this session with Udaipur Architecture Festival. Thank you so much, Sukhmani Plailam. Thank you so much, sir. So everyone, so there's next grand finale coming up at 7 o'clock. So please be there. And Udaipur Architecture Festival again is thankful to all of you to attend this session. And thank you so much, sir, for being part of this festival.
Thank you.
Thanks.
See you. Bye.
Thank you, sir.